I am here with Toby Shorin. Toby, welcome.
Thank you, Timur.
So I'd love to start with just a quick intro. If you could tell us who you are and what you're working on currently.
Yes, I am Toby. I'm perhaps known to more of you as the co-founder of Other Internet Research Institute, a research collective turned nonprofit in the crypto space, and focused on theorizing the way that digital technologies are transforming our world. And these days, I'm now working on Care Culture, which is a new membership society and publication for mental health and wellness professionals.
Awesome. Could you share a little bit of the context of how you came to the
Yeah.
idea of care culture?
Okay, so for the last several years, I have been really interested in questions of how people gather and like find meaning and purpose together. And that question has taken me through lots of different types of online communities and subcultures that I've studied. And I spent a lot of time looking at people trying to do this through the medium of brands and brand communities. My years in the crypto space were also spent looking at tokenized communities, token gated communities, communities that form around permissionless tokens that you can just buy, participatory governance communities, and all in all, looking at just the whole different ways that the communities come together, especially around moral premises. And after 7 or 8 years of looking at all these sorts of communities and ideologies forming online, I personally was a little bit burnt out on the online versions of these things. And
Yeah.
the big question for me over time was, how do those communities find firm ground, like find actual common ground in local space? And that question, after when I was thinking about moving on from the crypto space, that was really alive for me, and I was looking at a lot of different like places where that was happening. But one thing that kept coming up, and like feedback I was getting on some of the writing I was doing about this, was signal from like mental health and wellness spaces. And health practices in general were started to look really interesting to me, and I realized that's a place where people are embodying some of these ideas, moral ideas, ideological ideas, and some of them aren't really explicitly communities of worship, but a lot of them have qualities of communities that form around the sacred, like many of the crypto communities and like lifestyle communities that I previously had looked at.
Totally.
So that is what led me to kind of shift my focus to this. And I'm still thinking about a lot of the same questions, but I'm more interested in getting involved myself, not as necessarily a practitioner, because I don't have any formal training in any like clinical therapies, but I've been making a lot of friends with different practitioners, finding my way into different like therapy societies and networks, and yeah, am generally thinking about how to activate the kind of cultural and like sacred side of things for those communities, let's say.
Awesome. So we are talking here in the context of Edge Esmeralda, which is a pop-up village that we're organizing in June. And we're very excited to have you with us for that. And you'll be running something called the Concept Clinic.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if you could maybe outline what that entails and what that
Yeah.
actually is.
Yeah. So Concept Clinic is a kind of sandbox. I'm calling it a behavioral health studio and experimental test lab. But what that really means is it's a sandbox and container for me to give clinicians that I'm meeting and working with permission to play with the sorts of clinical structures, client-patient relationships, and clinical models that they are trying to have in their practices. So it started out as just a way for me to refer people who were asking me for referrals to clinicians or therapists or coaches to some of the really excellent people who I've been meeting and working with. But and a vague idea for like, oh, what would a pop-up clinic look like? What would it look like to demonstrate, to do a demo of what it looks like to match like a few different modalities that don't really always get paired together, that do play nicely together in physical space. And that was just an idea that I had a while back, but it is now coming to life in the as a pop-up concept clinic at Edge Esmeralda, where I will be bringing in a number of different practitioners, some of whom I'm working with on a week-to-week basis, some of whom I have participated in group practices and activities with, some of whom aren't even really thinking about their practices in the language and terms of mental health, but are super relevant to human flourishing and personal and emotional well-being. So I'm bringing all these people together over the course of a month, um, and it's a playground. So we'll see what comes out of it, and there will be more intentional touch points along the way too. We're going to do an unconference about integrative clinics and interprofessional practice in longevity and mental health. But really, this is a kind of experimental test ground.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a very interesting idea that I think you tweeted about at some point, which I'm going to butcher this, but along the lines of everyone's kind of entering, well, our generation is entering their 30s now, or they're kind of living through their 30s and have come to realize that the expectations that they had come to have
Mm-hmm.
about their lives maybe aren't necessarily coming true, and therefore
Mm-hmm.
either finding their way back to their childhood religion or maybe some other
Mm-hmm.
form of spirituality, or they're
Mm-hmm.
like glowing onto mental health as a concept, right? Was that
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
roughly correct?
That is roughly correct. And we have Mr. Johnny Bowman who will be coming to Esmeralda to thank for that because that idea came up in a chat with him. But yeah, I
Yeah.
from my perspective, and this is not a perspective that all clinicians, all mental health professionals share, but my perspective is that having looked at a lot of different subcultures and what makes them form, that there are deep cultural elements in the practice of even therapies that are viewed as a quasi science, like cognitive
Mm.
behavioral therapy. They're part of what makes them work is that they put us back in touch with cultural narratives that are a really big part of who we are. For CBT, that might be our sense of like masterful, bounded, rational agents whose like thoughts can dictate like our intentions and actions in the world. Um, but there are different therapies that draw on different aspects of our um, cultural moral life, and you see that with mindfulness and Buddhism being brought into the clinic in some ways, and you also see it with in a different area with like Jungian therapy, for example, and like cultural archetypes being a central part of the healing practices there. So I see these healing practices as uh, one way in which people fulfill like the moral world that they live in, and I'd like to make that more salient, especially for clinicians and coaches, especially as subcultures are forming in such rapid ways around treatment and self-diagnosis. Choice of treatment and choice of diagnosis is really becoming more of a cultural tribe, and I think these cultural elements will become really, really important in the next decades. And there needs
Fascinating.
to be literacy around how that interacts with like established therapies.
Fascinating. Yeah. It's almost like the path that you choose in this quest is already part of people's identities, and it's becoming more and more
Yes.
important in how they,
Yes.
yeah, interesting. So this leads me to, I think, the final question, which is in the context of these kinds of pop-up cities or pop-up villages and the communities that form around them, I'm curious, why this particular program? Why the concept clinic in this environment? Like, what's exciting
Mhm.
to you there?
Yeah, there are a few things. For one, although like health practices, cognitive practices, visualization practices, body practices are one angle on like how to take these kind of internet formed communities and bring them down to ground. The whole pop-up city idea is kind of another answer to that question.
Hmm.
They're both angles on the big question of our time, which is what are social forms that can overcome the technological disintermediation of our social lives that we've been living with and create new, robust, lasting social ties. So I think it's really fitting place to try some of these experiments. And um, Edge Esmeralda in particular is a I kind of see it as in terms of the culture that it's most like deeply steeped in, it's tech culture, this new form of tech culture, which is not just about the business of software and hardware, but draws from an expanded cultural canon of ideas about abundance, about creativity, and like founding things as a virtuous thing to do. Increasingly involved with the idea of like fitness as a form of like prowess and virtue. It feels like the things that have been like swirling around in the waters of tech culture are like kind of becoming a bit more concrete now. And yeah, I am interested in that as an observer, as a participant. I have kind of been outside of that culture a little bit, like, but also I'm of it. And so it's just it's a not and it's something that's happening right now and it just happens to it just feels like it's a miraculous fit for trying some of these experiments.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I think there's a very interesting, almost sociological, anthropological thing happening now in terms of this like post-internet. Well, obviously, it's still very much of the internet, but we now have
Yeah.
enough data to see what's happening to some degree. And I think these kinds of environments are going to be a very interesting place to just to experiment and see what actually comes out of this tech thing that's happening. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Toby. I'm really excited for June and really
Thank
appreciate
you.
you being involved.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun and there'll be lots of opportunities to play.